I want to start this morning by asking a question that I closed last week's service with. Have you ever made a mistake? If you've ever made a mistake, I just want you to raise your hand. If you've ever made a mistake, raise your hand. Now, keep your hands up. We had someone at 9:30 go. It was the president of our congregation, but I don't want to name any names. Look around. I want you to look around. Everybody's hands up. Okay? You can put your hand up. Everybody here has made a mistake. Everyone. There is no exception to that rule. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much effort we make, we all make mistakes. Some of the mistakes we make are pretty small. In fact, most of them are pretty small. We take a wrong turn, we drop something, we just inadvertently get something wrong. That happens. Those little things that we do each day are kind of easier to take and move beyond and fix. But sometimes the mistakes we make are pretty significant. Sometimes a mistake we make might end a relationship or deeply harm one. We might hurt a family member or a friend. Some of the mistakes we make might cost us financially. They might cost us our job. Sometimes we make mistakes and they're big enough that we find ourselves, even though we didn't mean to do it, we're in legal trouble. And sometimes, even though it's pretty rare, sometimes our mistakes can cause damage to property or to life, maybe even take life itself. Regardless of the scale of mistake, we all make mistakes. As a person who, I've got a pretty good resume of mistakes, but also as a pastor who walks alongside people who've made mistakes and who sees a community and watches a community, there's some things that I've noticed about mistakes and what happens when we make them. For most of us, at least for some of us, when a small mistake happens, we can kind of move beyond it pretty quickly. We own it, we accept it, we seek reconciliation for it, and we kind of move past it. Sometimes we do that pretty well. When we're our best selves, yeah, I did that. My bad, I'm so sorry. What can I do to make that right? Sometimes we can do that. Sometimes, though, we don't want to admit our mistake. Even if we know somewhere deep inside that we've probably done something, or at least we're a party to the mistake, sometimes we get defensive about it, and sometimes we feel vulnerable about it, and sometimes we just don't want to own the mistake that we've made, and sometimes we'll do anything to not have to do that. We'll blame others, we'll blame the circumstance, we'll deflect and defer and do everything we can because we don't want to own the mistake. Because sometimes maybe we don't see it, sometimes maybe it just hurts too much, or we just don't own it. Sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we feel like we're making so many mistakes, we've got to apologize for everything. And we say, I'm so sorry. And it feels like we always need forgiveness because we're always doing something wrong. And that's a really, really hard place to be. Because when we're in that place, sometimes our fear of mistakes can just freeze us. They can just lock us up. We're afraid to reach out and make friends. We're afraid to try something. We're afraid to attempt something. We're afraid we're going to fail. We're afraid we're going to hurt. And so we just get locked up for fear of failure and for fear of making a mistake. And then there are those times where a mistake that we've made either 2 hours ago or 10 years ago, we just can't let it go. And it won't let go of us. And we keep replaying it. What if I hadn't said this? What if I hadn't done that? What if they had responded differently? What if I had just kept my mouth shut? What if this would have happened? What if? And we get in this what if cycle where we start playing through all this stuff and we just can't let it go. And here's my experience with those kinds of things, the mistakes that grab hold of me and the mistakes that I can't let go of because I've grabbed hold of them so hard, is that they sneak up on me. I'm doing the dishes, right? And all of a sudden, that memory will pop up and I can feel all the emotions and all the embarrassment and all the anger and all that stuff. And I'm like, I was just a dirty spoon. What brought that on, right? Sometimes it just grabs you and you think, when am I ever going to be able to move past this? And sometimes it's really hard to let go of mistakes. Sometimes it's hard for mistakes to kind of let go of us. But here's the thing that I want to let you know as a person who's observed mistakes happen in our community, is that with very rare exception, we're not defined by our mistakes. I know sometimes we don't feel like that. I know sometimes we make a mistake and all we can do is think about our mistakes and our proclivity for mistakes and all those kinds of things, and we start to define ourselves by our mistakes. But I want to let you know for the most part, and with only rare exception for the people around us, they tend not to define us primarily by our mistakes, because everybody makes mistakes. You know what they define us by? How we respond. Because everybody makes mistakes. But sometimes we respond to those mistakes better than others. So today I want to talk about that a little bit. And I want to tell you a story from Scripture that is a story of an act. It's a great story to help us understand what's going on here. And the story comes from the book of 1 Samuel, the 30th chapter. And I really want to encourage you to read that chapter, but not right now. Don't open your Bibles. You can go out there and quote me all you want this week. My pastor said, don't read your Bible. I'm saying, don't read your Bible right now. Because this is what the Bible does with this story. It has that little introductory paragraph, the little title telling you what's coming. It totally gives away the ending. Right there, it tells you what's going to happen. Don't read that. Go read it later. It's a great story, but I just want to tell you this story because I think it has a lot to say to us about how we can respond to these kinds of situations in our lives. Maybe even help us let go of a mistake or two. Stories about David. Love stories about David. And this story takes place before David was ever king. The king at the time was a guy named Saul. And David and Saul have a complicated relationship. But at this point in the relationship, things aren't going so well. David has saved Saul's life twice. But Saul sees David as a threat, and so Saul wants to kill David. So David has got to flee. It always feels like David is fleeing from Saul. But David is fleeing from Saul, and he's got about 600 men and their families. And some others that are with him that are part of the kind of sworn allegiance to him. And so for their protection and safety, they leave. But they have nowhere to go because there's nowhere in Israel that is safe for them. And so they decide to do something that is so surprising to me. They go to the land of the Philistines. Does that name ring a bell for any of you? Let me remind you who the Philistines were. Do you remember when David was a boy and the Israelites were at war with a group of people called the Philistines? And they stood and they were getting ready to have a big fight. And the way they decided to settle that fight was that the Philistines had a big champion. And he was a really tall giant, and his name was Goliath, right? David fights Goliath. David kills Goliath. Israel wins the battle. The Philistines have lost, right? David, they don't like David in the land of the Philistines. But David's life is at such risk, he feels like he has no other option, so he goes to the king of the Philistines and he says, I need sanctuary for me and my people. We have nowhere we can go that is safe. And for whatever reason, I don't know, the Philistine king is in a really good mood, his team won the night before, I don't know. But the Philistine king says, yeah, I'll give you sanctuary. And so he gives them a place called Ziklag. And he tells David that they can go and all their people can live at Ziklag. So they go and they make residence at Ziklag. And while they live there, they begin to perform raids. Not just on anyone, on Israelites. David is attacking his own people, getting the plunder from that and bringing it back to the king of the Philistines in order to earn trust and win favor. And it works. The Philistine king begins to trust David, begins to respect David, begins to really appreciate David. Well, they've been in Ziklag for about 14 months. The Bible tells us they had lived in Ziklag for 14 months. And at 14 months, the Philistine king decides to go to war against Saul and the Israelites. And so they're preparing for battle, and David goes to the Philistine king, and David says to him, I want to fight alongside you. I want to fight against Saul. I want to be a part of this battle, and I want to be on your side. And the king said, there's nothing I'd love more. We need you. And so they marched several days north away from Ziklag. And as they marched north, their families, the women, the children, the men who could no longer fight and weren't able to for whatever reason, they stayed there to keep the home fires burning, and they headed up north. And they got up north and they were preparing for battle, and the Philistine commanders, they recognized David, right? They don't know all that David's done over the last 14 months. All they know, that's the dude that killed Goliath. That's the guy that beat us the last time. They rightfully don't trust David. They think he's a spy in their midst, and they think when they go off to battle, David's just going to turn on them and fight against them. And so they're terrified. They don't want this to happen. The Philistine king says, no, you all got it wrong, I promise you. And the king tries to talk them out of it, but still, they won't have any of it. So the king calls David to him and says, I know I trust you. I know you're going to do what's right. I know that you would be okay. But they don't trust you. I really think it's best for you to go ahead and go home. So David gathers up his men, and they begin to march back to Ziklag. And I don't know how long it took them to get there, but when they arrived, the unthinkable has happened. You know, when they left, there was no one left there to protect the people who were behind. And an army came and invaded Ziklag, took everything they owned, took the women and the children and the men who could not fight for whatever reason, took them as captives, and burned the entire city to the ground. Gone. When David and his men come upon it, the book of 1 Samuel tells us that they were filled with so much pain that they began to weep. And they wept and they cried until they physically could weep no more. Have you ever been there? I mean, this is a deep hurt. I mean, David has just made a mistake that is bigger than any mistake he's ever made in his life. He chose to go fight for a foreign king, and in doing so, he left all of these people behind, and they were vulnerable, and someone came in while they were gone, and it didn't even matter. They didn't get to fight anyway, and they come back, and it's all gone, and it's David's fault. It's his fault. He made the decision. He did it. He called for it. He's the one who told him to leave. And now, because of that, absolute devastation. David's men were so angry with him, they wanted to kill him. Can't blame him, can you? David doesn't deny what he's done is wrong. He doesn't deny his mistake. He doesn't try to walk away from it. After a period of weeping and repentance, David goes and connects with God because he just doesn't know where else to turn. And he seeks guidance and counsel and strength from God and wisdom from God. And in a period of discernment, David decides that he's got to go fix this. He's got to go make this right. But how's he supposed to do that? He has no idea where the army is. He has no idea where they came from. He doesn't even know who they are. All he knows is that they got to do something. And so they make this crazy decision, and they all just kind of pick up their stuff, and they just start walking. They have no idea where they're going. But they got to do something. So after walking for a while, they come across this wadi. It's like an oasis in the wilderness, and it's a place that can provide them with some sustenance and some peace and some rest. And when they get there and they make camp, 200 of the 600 men say, we're done. We're done. We can't do this anymore. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's happening. We're just exhausted. We're done. We're done. And David says, I get it. And he gives them provisions, and he gives them everything they need to stay there and be taken care of. And then he takes the remaining 400 men, and they just start marching off to nowhere again. Because anywhere is better than Ziklag. And as they're marching, they come across this guy. And he's dying in the middle of the wilderness. He's dying. He's sick, and he's not doing well. Can't talk. They don't know him. They stop everything. And they start to care for him. They tend to his illness, they tend to his wounds, they begin to give him water and food, and we have no idea how long it took, but they just brought this guy from the edge of death, and they bring him back to life. And as he starts to come to, he starts to talk, and they say, well, who are you? And he says, well, I'm an Egyptian, and I was taken slave by this group of people called the Amalekites. And as I was their slave, they were dragging us all over the place, and they were raiding all of these villages. David says, they were raiding villages? Guy says, yeah. He said, which one? He said, well, most recently it was this one called Ziklag. David, didn't take him long to put two and two together. And he says, hey, we've been really nice to you. We've been really good to you. We've taken care of you. Will you now be nice to us and take care of us? Do you know where they went? And the guy says, yeah, I know exactly where they are. They left me behind to die. David says, will you show us? The guy says, well, I will if you promise you won't kill me or turn me over. David says, done deal. Where are they? So the guy takes them to where the Amalekites are, and the Amalekites are having this great victory celebration because they have just been on a roll of winning all these raids, and they are excited. They're having a big party, kind of made the Kentucky Derby infield look like Vacation Bible School. I mean, they were letting it all hang out, and David's there, and he's watching this take place, and David's like, well, let's just let them go a little bit, right? And right when they got to their best, right? I mean, their worst. Now's the time. And they attacked. And they were able to save everyone who had been taken from Ziklag. The Bible tells us not a single life was lost. All the property that hadn't been destroyed was returned. And they took all of the other property that had been taken in the spoils of those raids by the Amalekites. It was a great day for David, and the families had all been reunited, and they began to journey back to Ziklag. And as they journeyed back to Ziklag, they came back to Wadi Bezor. And there were those 200 men. And they saw their families and their children and their friends. It was a great celebration, and everybody was reunited. And there was such joy among the people. And they began to spread out and to share the spoils, to return property, but not only just to return the property that was once theirs, but to give everybody the same portion of what was taken, the spoils of the victories. And as that was happening, some people started to see that the 200 people who didn't go and fight were getting the same as the 400 people who did. And some of them were like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, this is not fair. They didn't go and fight. Why are they getting the same amount? That shouldn't be happening. And David basically says to them, it is about fair. It's about what's right. Sometimes what's right doesn't feel fair. Therefore, they get the same amount. End of discussion. And the people went back to Ziklag and restored their lives. And here's where this part of the story ends. Now, I don't know about the mistakes that you've made in your life. I know about mine, and some of them have been pretty big, but none of them have amounted to that. This is a big, big mistake, and I pray that the mistakes we make don't have that kind of impact. And David's response to them, though, let me ask you this. When you think about David, King David, do you think about Ziklag? Like, before today, if I'd said, hey, do you remember the story of David and Ziklag? What? Where? What? That doesn't sound right. What are you talking about? Right? We do not define David by the decision that he made at Ziklag, do we? No. Because his response is what we remember and what he made of himself and his people afterward. And so I just want to talk about David's example of responding to mistakes. It's his journey. Our journeys are different. This is not a step-by-step solution, and it's not meant to be taken in order, but it gives us some things to think about when it comes to our own mistakes. And the first thing we see in David, as we've already talked about, is that he just owned his mistake. He didn't deny it. He didn't blame anybody else. He didn't try to minimize it. He just owned it. He said, yeah, no, that's on me. I did that. That is all my fault. I did that. If it's a small mistake and it doesn't matter, sometimes it's easy for us to own it. But sometimes when it's a big one and we know there's pain there, there's vulnerability there, it gets a little bit harder. And part of the challenge of owning a mistake is being vulnerable with the fallout that comes from that as we try to reach out and make reconciliation. But reconciliation for ourselves, letting go of those mistakes and making things better can never happen if we don't own it to begin with. If we can't admit our mistakes, we're stuck, we're frozen, we're not going anywhere. David says, I own it, I did it, and that was step one for him. The second thing he did was to seek the presence of God. For me, this has been hugely important in my journey of my million mistake march. When I make a mistake, I don't know about you, but it causes me a whole lot of emotions. Embarrassment, shame, anger, frustration, kind of just a loss of confidence. There's all kinds of things that happen to me when I make a mistake. There's people I can talk to about that and share that with, but sometimes even with the people that I trust the most, it's too vulnerable. And I can spend time with God, and I can be real about that, and I can be open about that, and I can be honest with that. And that happens for each of us in different ways. Some of you are journalers, and you like to write, journal. Some of you like to take a walk. Some of you like to listen to music. Some of you like to just be quiet. Some of you like to do different spiritual practices. But when we've made a mistake after we've owned it, I think it's so wise for us just to be present with God. Just to kind of start there and kind of ground ourselves and then start walking again. As we do that, I think it's important for us to do what David did, and that's to offer ourselves mercy. You remember a moment ago when I asked everybody here if you've made a mistake to raise your hand? Everybody did. Every single person in this room raised their hand, because every single person in this room has made mistakes. And yet sometimes when we make mistakes, we feel like we're the only broken person in the world, the only imperfect person in the world. And we take all that on ourselves, and it just becomes this burden. We know we can't be perfect. And yet when we make those mistakes, sometimes we take these burdens on, and it's so weighty and it's so heavy. Offer yourself a little grace. Offer yourself some mercy. I don't mean give yourself a free pass. It's okay to not be perfect. Says the guy who has to tell himself that about 10 times a day. Right? It's okay. Offer yourself a little grace. Then attempt to make it right. And focus on the word attempt. Right? And sometimes that means vulnerability, it means effort. Sometimes it can be as simple as saying I'm sorry, a hug, a letter, an email, a phone call, a simple present. Sometimes it has to be something a little bigger than that. Sometimes we've really got to put ourselves out there in a way that could place us in the same kind of risk that placed David and his people. Sometimes we don't even know how to make it better, and sometimes we just start walking. We got nowhere else to be. We know we don't want to be at Ziklag, so we just start walking. Trusting and hoping that we're walking in the right direction. Attempting to make it better is part of that process of letting go. And whatever that looks like for you. But as you do so, don't lose peripheral vision. I suffer from what I call straight-ahead Fred syndrome. I cannot stand ambiguity in my life. I do not like ambiguity. And so if I've done something wrong, if I've made a mistake, if I need to make that right, I'm so focused on making that right that that's my mission. I'm not going to rest until that's right. And sometimes when we get so focused on a mission, no matter how important it is, everything that happens to the side and the periphery, we don't see because we're locked in. David has got a mission that's far more important than any reconciling mission I've ever been on. People are literally at risk, and yet when he comes across the stranger in the desert, what does he do? He stops the mission. Because David hasn't lost focus of what happens on the periphery. And David knows that as important as his mission is, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And so he doesn't ignore the opportunity. He doesn't make a second mistake. He stops and he cares for the guy. He restores him to life. And by the way, it works out for him. Call it karma, serendipity, whatever. But he helps the guy, and the guy helps him and helps him lead him on his way. Take that for what it's worth. And finally, I just want to encourage you to offer grace to others. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we don't understand why people won't offer us grace, and then other people make mistakes and we don't offer them grace. And here's the thing when it comes to mistakes, I am not talking about intentional hurts and wrongs. I'm not talking about that here. That's a whole different ballgame when it comes to forgiveness and all that stuff. I'm talking about mistakes. Mistakes. Things that happen with best intention, but they just happen. There's mistakes. If we can't find grace for other people in the midst of their mistakes, we're doing it wrong. We're doing it wrong. And the reason that I say that is because that's what our faith is all about. It's about grace and forgiveness and mercy. You see, we like to think of ourselves as the 400 who march off and who restore everything and make everything perfect. We like to think of ourselves as that group. When in reality, the story of faith tells us that we're part of the 200 left at the Wadi Bezor. We're the ones that don't deserve any of the spoils. We're the ones that don't deserve any of the grace. We're the ones where the ruler comes back and says, I know you're broken. I know you're fallen. I know you're faltered. I know you didn't do anything to earn this. But here it is, not because it's fair, but because it's right. Man, we are so broken. We were so mistaken. The only fair thing God could have done for us was to just leave us to our own devices. Instead, God came in the form of Jesus Christ. Again, not just to die for us, but to live in our midst and show us what it looks like to love and to care and to reconcile and to have mercy, to receive mercy, and to extend mercy. Every single one of us, at some point, is waiting by the Wadi Bezor. And what we deserve is for Jesus just to walk by. But he doesn't. He makes a beeline right for us right there because he knows that's where we need him most. Here in a couple of weeks, we're going to celebrate Easter. Easter is the greatest single story ever told in human history. And at the heart of that story is unmerited, undeserved grace. A mistaken, fallen, broken people. Not left behind, but restored. Not because it's fair, but because it's right. As we continue to prepare for that journey, I know there's some mistakes that are gripping you. I know there's some mistakes that you're gripping. I just want to encourage you the very best that you can to let go, to offer those things to God, to let Him rest in the shadow of the cross. Because on the other side, there is life.